Linda, sometimes referred to by her middle name Fiona, prided herself on being the unofficial gatekeeper of Oakwood Village. From the moment she moved into this serene suburban enclave, she appointed herself the overseer of every front lawn, every parked car, and every person who dared to stroll through the winding roads of her neighborhood. Despite being relatively new to the area, Linda spoke as though she had founded Oakwood Village single-handedly. Her fervent desire for control colored her interactions with neighbors, and she often complained about what she deemed outsiders, who, in her mind, threatened the pristine nature of her community. Oakwood Village itself was a picturesque place known for tree-lined sidewalks, cheerful porch gatherings, and a well-maintained recreation hall at its center. Over the years, the recreation hall had become a focal point for block parties, holiday celebrations, and casual coffee meetups. Before Linda arrived, few conflicts ever stirred among the residents. Neighbors looked out for one another, and small-town warmth thrived. However, Linda's fixation on order quickly created tension. She kept meticulous notes on who came and went, what cars they drove, and how frequently they trimmed their hedges. She would, without hesitation, march over to a neighbor's house if their garbage cans were left at the curb a minute past collection time. Some tried to humor her, chalking it up to an overzealous personality. Others, however, felt stifled and even spied upon, lamenting that Oakwood Village was losing its friendly charm under Linda's constant scrutiny. One day, Linda discovered that the previously open wireless connection at the recreation hall had been secured with a password. This change coincided with the recent election of Sheriff Beaumont, a well-respected county officer who had vowed to improve safety and organization in all public spaces. To Linda, it seemed far too coincidental. She had grown used to using the hall's Wi-Fi whenever she pleased, browsing the internet on her tablet, sending out emails with neighborly suggestions, and lurking on social media for potential community infractions. When she first saw the small padlock symbol appear on her device's screen, Linda experienced a sudden jolt of frustration. Her immediate assumption was that this new sheriff had targeted her personally. She refused to consider that it was a general policy meant to protect residents from data breaches or unwanted intrusions. Instead, Linda decided that she was the victim of an intentional slight. She muttered to herself about the audacity of local officials and the ineptitude of anyone who dared to inconvenience her. Rather than seeking clarification by asking around or checking community bulletins for the password, Linda allowed her irritation to fester. She believed wholeheartedly that this was an attack on her autonomy and her ability to maintain oversight of Oakwood Village. With each passing hour, her indignation grew, fueled by her certainty that someone, perhaps Sheriff Beaumont himself, was orchestrating a campaign to keep her in the dark. Little did she realize that her reaction would soon spiral into a much larger, very public controversy. Several days later, Linda discovered something that only increased her paranoia: a neatly printed flyer, posted on the bulletin board in the recreation hall's lobby, bearing a line of text that read, "Recreation Hall Wi-Fi password, Oakwood guest." Below the bold letters, there was an explanation that the password was being used to ensure fair access and to prevent misuse or hacking attempts. Linda stared at this notice in disbelief. All this time, she could have simply looked at the board to find the information she needed. Yet, in her eyes, this didn't absolve Sheriff Beaumont of wrongdoing. Instead, it deepened her conviction that he was purposefully toying with her. The truth was that Sheriff Beaumont had assumed office with a promise to streamline local security measures. One of his earliest tasks was to secure public networks in the county, including the one at Oakwood Village's recreation hall. He reasoned that a simple, publicly posted password would keep casual hackers at bay while still granting residents easy access to the internet. Unfortunately, he hadn't anticipated the fervor with which Linda guarded her sense of entitlement. Linda, however, remained blind to the practical reasons for this policy. In her mind, the sheriff's actions confirmed her suspicions: he was singling her out. Why else would he hide the password on a public bulletin board rather than personally informing her? She viewed the entire scenario as a classic case of disrespect toward her self-proclaimed role in the neighborhood. If the community's main gathering place was suddenly off-limits to her prying eyes, what else might be slipping beyond her control? Agitated and convinced that she was a victim, Linda decided the next step was to confront the source of her woes. Emboldened by her own righteous indignation, she poured herself a generous glass of wine one afternoon, pacing around her living room and muttering about her oppressors. She worked herself into a state of near hysteria, convinced that no one else could see the injustice unfolding in Oakwood Village. Without waiting to cool down or gather her thoughts, Linda stormed out of her house and headed straight to the sheriff's office. The building was a modest structure, with an American flag waving proudly at the entrance. Inside, the polished floor and bright fluorescent lights did nothing to calm her. She demanded to speak with Sheriff Beaumont, ignoring the startled receptionist who tried to guide her toward a more orderly process. When she finally reached the sheriff, Linda pointed an accusatory finger at him, her voice echoing off the walls. She demanded an explanation for why she was being denied her basic right to free Wi-Fi. Her words came fast, slurred at times from the wine, and laden with insinuations that he was discriminating against her. She kept repeating that she was a model citizen, and that she had done nothing to deserve having her access restricted. Sheriff Beaumont, taken aback by her tone, tried to explain the security concerns that led to password-protected networks. He even told her that the password was posted for all to see. Linda, however, refused to listen. She accused him of deliberately withholding it, even as he gestured toward a stack of flyers with the network credentials clearly printed. Her frustration, tinged with tipsiness, boiled over into vehement claims that he was targeting her with malicious intent. The stage was now set for a conflict that would soon capture the attention of everyone in Oakwood Village, and beyond. Linda's tirade reached new heights as she slammed her palm on Sheriff Beaumont's desk, proclaiming that she would take whatever legal action was necessary to fight this supposed mistreatment. The tension in the small, fluorescent-lit office was palpable. Other staff in the sheriff's department paused their work, exchanging worried looks. Sheriff Beaumont held his composure, calmly reiterating that the password was public and that his only intention was to ensure a safe and secure experience for all residents of Oakwood Village. In the hallway, a junior deputy discreetly stepped closer to listen, drawn by Linda's raised voice. The sheriff noticed and lightly shook his head, signaling the deputy to hold off on any intervention. If Linda needed to vent her frustrations, perhaps letting her speak her mind would reduce the chance of a more explosive confrontation. But Linda had no interest in calming down. She interpreted the sheriff's attempt at patience as condescension, fueling her indignation even further. After a few more minutes of back and forth, Linda abruptly pivoted. She declared that if Sheriff Beaumont refused to address her grievances, she had another option: 911. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone, glared at the sheriff, and punched in the numbers. The sheriff raised an eyebrow, incredulous that she would dial the emergency line right then and there. Yet Linda, convinced of her own righteousness, pressed the phone to her ear and waited for a dispatcher to pick up. The tension among the onlookers grew. A hush fell over the nearby staff as Linda began speaking into her phone. "I need help immediately. I'm being harassed and discriminated against," she exclaimed. From her agitated tone, anyone overhearing might have assumed she was in a life-threatening situation. Sheriff Beaumont watched, arms crossed, choosing not to interrupt, although the exasperation in his eyes was evident. On the other end of the line, the dispatcher asked for details. Linda launched into a diatribe about how the local recreation hall's wireless connection was now password-protected and implied that she was a victim of systemic bias. She carefully omitted any mention of the password being publicly available. Instead, she emphasized how she felt singled out by the sheriff's new policy. Sheriff Beaumont, hearing only one side of the conversation, could guess she was painting the rosiest version of her own predicament. Within minutes, word reached the department's dispatch center, a place also overseen by Sheriff Beaumont. The staff recognized Linda's name from prior neighborhood complaints about everything from barking dogs to teenagers skateboarding on the sidewalk. As the call circulated through the proper channels, the sheriff decided to observe rather than cut her off. He wanted to see how far Linda would take this and whether she would indeed escalate the situation to its fullest. Linda, emboldened by the notion that 911 would surely side with her, continued her call. She spoke rapidly, tossing around terms like harassment, bias, and injustice. At no point did she elaborate that she was physically safe or that the emergency revolved around internet access. Meanwhile, the dispatcher maintained professional composure, calmly logging Linda's statements and attempting to get clarity on what immediate threat, if any, existed. From the dispatcher's perspective, there was no apparent emergency, just a resident upset over a routine security measure. By the time Linda ended the call, she appeared both triumphant and slightly flustered. She turned back to Sheriff Beaumont with a self-satisfied smile, certain that uniformed officers would be rushing to her aid. The sheriff, still standing with arms folded, simply sighed. He understood that protocol required officers to respond to a 911 call, no matter how trivial it might seem. Unnecessary calls could tie up resources, and Linda seemed to disregard that altogether. In her mind, the Wi-Fi issue genuinely constituted a crisis of epic proportions. Before long, the phone at the front desk rang. One of the receptionists picked up, nodded along to the caller, and informed the sheriff that 2 patrol units were indeed en route. Sheriff Beaumont, leaning against the edge of his desk, turned to Linda and said firmly, "You realize that our resources are limited, don't you? If there's an actual emergency in Oakwood Village right now, those officers won't be available to respond immediately because of this." Linda shot him a look of anger, unwilling to accept any critique of her behavior. "It's not my fault," she retorted. "If you hadn't locked up that wireless connection and singled me out, none of this would be happening." The sheriff considered responding but decided against it. He recognized that Linda was past the point of listening to reason. Instead, he mentally prepared for the next step, the arrival of officers who, in any normal circumstance, would be handling genuine emergencies. In just a short while, Oakwood Village would be buzzing with talk of Linda's actions, but she seemed oblivious to the bigger consequences her behavior might have. Not long after Linda's 911 call ended, 2 patrol cars pulled up outside the sheriff's station. Their presence was impossible to miss. Flashing lights reflected on the building's windows, and the distinctive rumble of engines broke the mid-afternoon calm. Deputies Ian Blake and Sandra Torres, both seasoned in handling local disturbances, stepped out of their vehicles. They approached the front entrance, exchanging puzzled glances about the nature of the call that had summoned them. Inside, staff members had already informed Sheriff Beaumont that Deputies Blake and Torres were on the scene. He asked them to come into the main lobby, where Linda was pacing angrily near a row of plastic chairs. She continued to mutter under her breath about how the community's basic rights were being trampled upon, though her ranting was mostly incomprehensible at this point. Deputy Blake, equipped with a body camera, approached Linda first. He politely introduced himself, stating that they had received a call reporting harassment and discrimination. Linda offered them a clipped nod, then immediately launched into her prepared spiel. She repeated her grievances, that the recreation hall's Wi-Fi had always been open, that she had used it without issue, and that Sheriff Beaumont's new password policy was, in her words, a targeted attack. She also implied that there were deeper motives at play, though she struggled to articulate exactly what they were. Meanwhile, Deputy Torres listened attentively, taking mental notes on Linda's statements. She asked for clarification. Had Linda been physically threatened? Was there anyone preventing her from leaving the building? Could she point to a direct danger that required urgent police intervention? Each time, Linda had no concrete answers. Instead, she pivoted back to her belief that she was the victim of a conspiracy, a scenario in which Sheriff Beaumont was personally tormenting her by limiting her internet access. As the deputies spoke with Linda, the sheriff himself observed from a short distance, ready to step in if things escalated. He quietly admired the calm professionalism of his 2 deputies, who asked measured questions in an attempt to uncover any real threat. They were met only with Linda's hyperbolic language, sprinkled with accusations of deliberate persecution. During a lull in the exchange, Deputy Blake gently told Linda that 911 was meant for urgent emergencies, crimes in progress, life-threatening situations, or critical safety concerns. He noted that merely requiring a password for a public Wi-Fi network did not meet that threshold. Linda bristled at this suggestion, crossing her arms defiantly. She retorted that, as a taxpayer and an upstanding citizen, she had every right to call for help when she felt harassed. Deputy Torres glanced at her partner, wondering how best to de-escalate the situation. With her training, she recognized that Linda's anger stemmed not just from the Wi-Fi password but also from a deeper need for control. Torres offered a sympathetic nod, trying to validate Linda's feelings without endorsing her claims. "I understand you're upset, ma'am. Let's sort through this calmly." At that moment, Deputy Blake activated his body camera's recording function more overtly, holding it up for Linda to see. "For transparency," he explained. Linda, caught off guard, momentarily quieted. She squinted at the camera, then straightened her posture. A flash of realization seemed to cross her face. Her words and demeanor could be captured and potentially used to evaluate the legitimacy of her 911 call. In the background, other department staff paused to watch. Some were on phones, fielding routine inquiries or following up on genuine issues around Oakwood Village. A few civilians lingered in the corridor, peeking at the unfolding drama with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Sheriff Beaumont decided this was the moment to clarify the situation. He stepped forward, raising a hand slightly to gather everyone's attention. He reiterated the reasoning behind the secured network, protecting community members and preventing unauthorized usage. He then confirmed that the password was posted conspicuously throughout the recreation hall, adding that any resident, including Linda, was free to use it at any time. Deputy Blake and Deputy Torres exchanged knowing looks. The tension in the room shifted. Linda hesitated, the self-assuredness from her earlier tirade wavering. It was becoming increasingly apparent that her call to 911 had been a gross overreaction. Yet she clung to her outrage, refusing to concede that she might have made a mistake. As the deputies began jotting notes and politely asking Linda to confirm whether she truly believed she was in physical danger, her stance softened only marginally. She insisted that while she hadn't been harmed, she still felt deliberately targeted. The deputies, maintaining their composure, documented her statements. They recognized that there was no real emergency to address here, only a tense confrontation rooted in misunderstanding and Linda's stubborn refusal to accept that she was not, in fact, the victim of any conspiracy. By the end of their initial assessment, both Deputy Blake and Deputy Torres realized the best course of action would be to have Linda calm down and find a more constructive way to address her concerns. Still, the official process had to continue. A wasted 911 call was not taken lightly, and Linda's uncooperative attitude hinted that things might only grow more complicated. Once the immediate confrontation subsided, Deputies Blake and Torres stepped aside to review the footage captured on the body camera. Standing in a quiet corner of the lobby, they played back Linda's animated monologue, her pointed accusations, and Sheriff Beaumont's calm rebuttals. The audio was clear, and the video showed Linda's confrontational posture, arms often crossed or flung in the air to emphasize her exasperation. Deputy Blake shook his head slowly. "I've seen neighbors upset over property lines and noise complaints, but this is a new one," he remarked. "She genuinely seems to believe this is a personal attack." Deputy Torres nodded. "It's unfortunate. There's no emergency here, but she's convinced there's a conspiracy against her. We'll need to address the misuse of 911. Together, they walked back over to Linda, who was seated in a plastic chair, foot tapping impatiently. Her eyes flitted from one deputy to the other, and she demanded to know if they had finally understood the depths of her predicament. Deputy Blake crouched slightly to meet her at eye level, adopting a more empathetic tone. "Ma'am," he began, "we've reviewed the footage and the statements from everyone involved. We see that you're upset about the recreation hall's new password requirement. However, calling 911 for this isn't appropriate. The phone line is reserved for life-threatening or urgent situations. By using it to file a complaint over Wi-Fi, you're tying up resources that could be needed for real emergencies. Linda's face tightened. She tried to interject, but Deputy Blake continued calmly. "We aren't here to dismiss your feelings, but we need to be clear, the policy is not targeting you. The password is publicly posted, and you're free to use it. There's no indication of discrimination or personal malice, just standard security measures." At that moment, Deputy Torres chimed in, her tone gentle but firm. "We must also warn you that filing false reports or misusing 911 can have consequences. This is a formal caution. If you truly feel harassed, there are proper channels for lodging a complaint. You can speak with the department in a non-emergency context, or you can address it with local community officials. But using 911 in a non-emergency capacity places an unnecessary strain on our department." For a flicker of a second, Linda appeared chastened. She bit her lip and glanced at the floor. But as soon as she felt the weight of their words, she straightened up, clinging to her indignation. "I still believe I'm being singled out," she insisted. "Sheriff Beaumont knows how much I rely on that free Wi-Fi for my neighborhood reports. This isn't just about internet access, it's about principle." Deputy Torres's expression remained neutral. "We hear you, ma'am," she said softly. "But our conclusion is that no crime has taken place. We encourage you to resolve this through normal community processes." Linda scowled but said nothing more. The tension in the room lingered, thick and unyielding, as the deputies concluded their official documentation. They handed Linda a small informational sheet about non-emergency numbers and how to file proper complaints, then reminded her one final time that any abuse of emergency services could lead to further action. Across the lobby, Sheriff Beaumont let out a subtle sigh of relief. The confrontation had wound down, but the fallout was just beginning. He suspected that Linda's outrage would soon bubble over into public forums, social media pages, community message boards, and gossipy conversations at local coffee shops. Oakwood Village might have been a quaint and quiet place, but rumors spread quickly, and Linda's dramatic tirade would make for compelling chatter. Before departing, Deputy Blake approached Sheriff Beaumont to confirm there was nothing more urgent to handle. The sheriff shook his head. "No official complaints from her that require follow-up, beyond what you've already done. Let's just keep an eye on things, in case she tries another stunt." The deputies nodded and headed back to their patrol cars, leaving Linda to brood in the station lobby. Once alone with the sheriff, Linda shot him a glare that could have burned holes through granite. "I won't forget this," she warned. "I'll make sure the whole town knows how you trample on the rights of your residents." Sheriff Beaumont, accustomed to dealing with far graver threats, simply shrugged. He offered a measured response, "You're free to share your perspective, Linda. But please consider that we're all working to keep Oakwood Village safe. That includes securing our public networks." She gave a disdainful snort and stormed out, determined to gather support for her crusade. Unbeknownst to her, the day's events were already captured not just on a body camera, but also on a personal recording device that Deputy Blake sometimes used to verify details for incident reports. This meant there was a clear, unedited version of Linda's ranting and the deputies' calm responses, a reality that would soon factor prominently into how the community at large would perceive her actions. Outside, Linda spotted a few curious onlookers who had gathered near the patrol cars. She lifted her chin and proclaimed, "They're all against me." Every single one of them, ensuring that her claims of victimhood carried beyond the station walls. Little did she know, her own behavior had sown the seeds of what would become a wave of backlash, both in Oakwood Village and in the broader county beyond its gates. Later that evening, as Linda sat in her living room, she noticed her phone buzzing incessantly. She picked it up to find messages from acquaintances, former allies in her self-styled community oversight mission, and even a few strangers. Most texts contained links to various social media posts. Confused, Linda tapped on one of the links and found herself staring at a viral video of none other than herself in the sheriff's station lobby. In the clip, which seemed to have been pieced together from Deputy Blake's body camera footage and an onlooker's phone recording, Linda was shown bursting through the station doors, demanding that Sheriff Beaumont remove the password on the recreation hall's Wi-Fi. The audio captured her accusing him of targeting her, insinuating a grand conspiracy, and ultimately placing a 911 call over what was clearly a non-emergency. The video ended with a snippet of the deputies calmly warning her about misusing emergency services. The online reaction was swift and brutal. While a few individuals expressed sympathy, claiming the sheriff's department had been too dismissive, an overwhelming majority criticized Linda's overreaction. Some commenters pointed out that she seemed to know the password was publicly available yet chose to ignore it. Others remarked on her combative demeanor, stating that she was the embodiment of entitlement. More humiliatingly for Linda, local media outlets picked up the story, labeling her behavior as a prime example of wasting taxpayer dollars and tying up valuable police resources. Within hours, Linda's name became the talk of Oakwood Village and the surrounding towns. Hashtags referencing her meltdown trended in local online communities. Memes featuring her outraged face, phone pressed to her ear, began circulating among younger residents. People criticized her disregard for real emergencies, especially at a time when the county's emergency services might be stretched thin. Linda's phone continued to light up with calls and messages from neighbors, many of them outraged at her. She initially tried to push back, sending long-winded texts about how she was fighting for principle, and that the sheriff's office had singled her out. But with each rebuttal, the backlash only intensified. Screenshots of her messages were reshared in group chats, and her defensive comments were dissected piece by piece. Though Linda refused to see it, the narrative clearly painted her as a neighbor who had taken her personal vendetta to a ridiculous, disruptive extreme. By the next morning, news vans had begun to circle the perimeter of Oakwood Village. Reporters hoping for a sensational story camped near the recreation hall and even outside Linda's home, eager for a statement. Some of the more persistent journalists approached passers-by to ask for their thoughts on the Oakwood Village 9/11 scandal, as it was now being called on local news stations. Many residents, formerly indifferent to Linda's self-appointed role as community watchdog, were now unafraid to voice their disapproval. The day was rife with tension for Linda. Every attempt she made to defend herself seemed to backfire. On social media, she posted lengthy rants about her right to enjoy free Wi-Fi, suggesting that Sheriff Beaumont had locked her out of spite. Commenters responded by linking to official county announcements explaining why the password was installed and how it was easily accessible to anyone who bothered to look. Some even posted photos of the flyers in the recreation hall with the password spelled out in bold lettering. The turning point came when a major local newspaper ran an editorial piece titled, "A Cry Wolf Moment in Oakwood Village," which detailed the entire fiasco and highlighted the importance of using 911 responsibly. The editorial went on to warn that Linda's behavior could set a dangerous precedent if left unchecked. It also stressed that real emergencies, such as fires, burglaries, or medical crises, must take priority, and that frivolous calls risk everyone's safety. Humiliated yet still defiant, Linda locked herself inside her home for most of that day, peering out from behind closed blinds at reporters stationed on the sidewalk. Friends she had once leaned on for support no longer answered her calls, wary of associating with the sudden infamy swirling around her. In the span of just 24 hours, she had gone from self-styled neighborhood guardian to public enemy number one. Sheriff Beaumont, for his part, found himself fielding questions from the media. While he refrained from publicly criticizing Linda, he did express concern about how quickly misinformation could spread if residents chose confrontation over open communication. He assured reporters that the Wi-Fi password had been clearly displayed and that his office's sole aim was to protect the public. Quietly, however, he made a mental note to keep monitoring Linda's activities. She had proven that she was unpredictable, and he didn't want another incident blowing up into a media circus. By nightfall, Linda's mind churned with conflicting emotions. She was furious at the entire community for siding with the sheriff and resentful of the deputies for reprimanding her, yet she felt a growing sense of isolation. Through the haze of her indignation, a small voice nagged at her, hinting that maybe, just maybe, she had taken things too far. Still, Linda was not one to back down easily, and the thought of admitting fault seemed too painful to confront. For the moment, she remained entrenched in her belief that Oakwood Village simply did not appreciate her brand of vigilance. The very next week, Oakwood Village's neighborhood council convened a special session to address recent disruptions within the community. Usually, these meetings were casual affairs, a handful of neighbors sipping coffee in the recreation hall's meeting room, discussing landscaping guidelines or planning holiday events. But on this particular evening, the small space overflowed with concerned residents, curious bystanders, and even a few local journalists. Everyone knew why the room was packed: Linda's now infamous Wi-Fi incident. Sitting at a long table at the front were the council members, including Chairperson Agnes Whitfield, who had initially welcomed Linda into the community with open arms. Agnes, an older woman with a warm smile, had prided herself on Oakwood Village's tradition of neighborly cooperation. She cleared her throat and tapped the microphone to call the meeting to order. Immediately, a hush fell over the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," Agnes began, her voice carrying a slight tremble. "We're here to discuss a matter that has brought a lot of attention to our neighborhood, not all of it positive." She paused, glancing down at her notes. "I think we all know what that matter is. But we also want to move forward in a constructive way." Linda sat near the back, arms crossed, attempting to avoid eye contact with the many residents whose gazes bore into her. She had once been the loudest voice in these meetings, taking every opportunity to air her grievances about late-night noise or unkempt lawns. Now, she was uncharacteristically silent. Next to her, a couple of neighbors whispered to each other, occasionally stealing glances in her direction. Linda pretended not to notice. When Agnes opened the floor to public comment, a line formed behind the podium. First up was a middle-aged man named Victor Reyes, who had lived in Oakwood Village for over a decade. He spoke calmly but firmly about how the recent media attention made the neighborhood look foolish. "I have out-of-state family calling me to ask about this Wi-Fi fiasco," he said. "We used to be known for our friendly atmosphere and scenic streets, and now we're the butt of jokes on the internet." The next speaker, a grandmotherly figure named Loretta Nash, was more sympathetic but still critical. "Linda's always been involved in the community," she acknowledged, "and I believe she means well. But calling 911 over a Wi-Fi password is not the way to handle things. My granddaughter is a nurse. She deals with real emergencies every day. We need to respect the purpose of emergency services." A handful of others spoke in a similar vein, expressing disappointment, calling for accountability, and pleading for Oakwood Village to restore its good name. After several more comments, Agnes cleared her throat again. "Thank you," she said, scanning the audience. "At this time, we'd like to address one of our own. Linda, would you like to come forward and speak?" All eyes turned to Linda. She hesitated, torn between her desire to defend herself and her fear of further public humiliation. Summoning a semblance of courage, she stood and walked to the front, shoulders stiff. As she approached the podium, a hush fell over the crowd again. With a tight grip on the microphone, Linda began, "I understand everyone's upset. But I want to make it clear I was just looking out for Oakwood Village. We can't let our community become a place where officials do as they please without telling us." She paused, swallowing hard. "I believe the sheriff's office singled me out. And I believe I had the right to call for help when I felt harassed." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some shook their heads, others rolled their eyes. Sensing the crowd's skepticism, Linda lifted her chin. "I'm not apologizing for caring," she added. "My methods might not be what you all agree with, but I stand by my intentions." Agnes nodded slowly and offered a polite smile. "Thank you for sharing, Linda. We've heard your side. Now, the council has to make some decisions regarding how to handle this situation." She gestured to the other council members, who each had a folder of documents in front of them. "We've taken note of the negative publicity this has brought. We also acknowledge the potential misuse of emergency services. After careful deliberation, we believe a response is necessary." One of the council members, a stern-faced man named Harold Brooks, cleared his throat. Linda, we're aware you've served on several neighborhood committees and have been vocal about local policies. However, in light of recent events, we feel it's best to relieve you of any official roles you currently hold within the neighborhood council, effective immediately. A hush fell once again. Linda's cheeks burned with a mix of anger and embarrassment. This was a public rebuke, one that not even she had entirely expected. "You're removing me?" she asked, voice shaking slightly. "Yes," Harold confirmed. "We believe it's in the best interest of Oakwood Village. We also plan to issue a formal apology to Sheriff Beaumont for the trouble and the negative attention this incident has caused." Linda stood there, stunned. Just weeks ago, she had imagined herself on a fast track to wielding even more influence in the community. Now, she was being cast aside, her standing in the neighborhood tarnished. A few people in the crowd clapped, though most remained quiet, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment. Agnes ended the meeting with a subdued expression. "We hope this decision helps Oakwood Village move on and begin the process of rebuilding trust, with each other and with law enforcement. We value participation and advocacy, but it must be done responsibly." Humiliated, Linda turned on her heel and marched to the door, ignoring the whispers that swirled around her. As she pushed the door open and stepped into the cool night air, she realized that her standing in Oakwood Village might never be the same. Yet, she wasn't quite ready to surrender to remorse. In her mind, a small ember of indignation still burned, fueling the notion that somehow, she had been wronged. Little did she know, the days ahead would present an opportunity for a reckoning she could not avoid forever. In the wake of the neighborhood council's decision, the media coverage around Linda's actions slowly died down, but the repercussions in Oakwood Village continued. The once talkative Linda found herself increasingly isolated. Neighbors avoided making eye contact when she walked her dog in the mornings. The local cafe, where she used to chat up the staff about every minor infringement she noticed, felt colder. People didn't go out of their way to say hello anymore. Some friends she had counted on for moral support quietly distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with her abrasive tactics. Despite her initial defiance, Linda couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. She felt a mix of anger and a strange guilt that gnawed at her whenever she drove past the recreation hall. The building now felt like a monument to her embarrassment. Yet, she couldn't summon the courage to go inside, not even to read the announcements posted on the bulletin board, the same board that had displayed the Wi-Fi password she had ignored. Meanwhile, Sheriff Beaumont had watched the public's reaction from a measured distance. He understood that Linda's misguided outburst stemmed from more than just Wi-Fi access. It seemed rooted in a genuine fear of losing her grip on the community she held so dear. And though her accusations of discrimination had been baseless, the sheriff recognized that Linda might benefit from a more constructive dialogue than she'd had so far. After discussions with his deputies and a few community leaders, Sheriff Beaumont decided on a course of action. He arranged for a meeting with Linda, one that would take place at the sheriff's office but would include a neutral party. This neutral party was Ms. Clarissa Yu, a cultural liaison known for her work in mediating neighborhood disputes and fostering inclusive environments. Ms. Yu had a reputation for finding common ground even in heated situations. When Linda received the invitation via a polite phone call from the sheriff's receptionist, she was taken aback. Part of her wanted to refuse outright, but a spark of curiosity led her to accept. On a cool afternoon, Linda walked through the station's doors once more. This time, the atmosphere was different. There were no raised voices, no rapt audience. The receptionist guided her to a small conference room furnished with a round table and a few chairs. Sheriff Beaumont stood when she entered, extending a polite nod. Ms. Yu, a petite woman with a calm demeanor, smiled warmly and gestured for Linda to sit. "Thank you for coming," Sheriff Beaumont began. "I know the past few weeks have been tough for you, and for the community. I thought it might help if we had a conversation, with a mediator's perspective, to see if there's a way forward." Linda folded her arms and lowered her gaze, feeling oddly self-conscious. "I'm here. I'm listening," she replied curtly. Ms. Yu cleared her throat softly and leaned in. Linda, the goal isn't to point fingers today. We'd like to understand your perspective and share how your actions have impacted not just the sheriff's department but also the residents of Oakwood Village. Then we can see if there's a way to rebuild trust. For a moment, Linda said nothing. Then, in a subdued voice, she recounted how she had felt excluded and targeted. She admitted she enjoyed playing a prominent role in the community, writing updates, monitoring any changes in neighborhood policies, ensuring that no detail escaped her notice. I just wanted to make sure everything was done right, she said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. I know people think I'm meddling, but I see it as protecting my home. Sheriff Beaumont listened carefully. When Linda finished, he placed his hands on the table and spoke in a calm, measured tone. No one wants to take away your desire to be involved, Linda. But you have to understand how misusing 911 and confronting my deputies put a strain on our resources. There are real emergencies out there. We can't tie up our lines and officers for a password issue. Ms. Yu nodded. Sometimes, when we feel we're being ignored, we escalate situations just to be heard. Could that be what happened here, Linda? Linda hesitated. The question dug deeper than she liked. Swallowing her pride, she whispered, maybe. Well, I guess I wasn't listening to what was actually going on. I was too focused on my own frustration. A small sense of relief washed over Sheriff Beaumont's face. That's the honesty we need, he said. My office isn't perfect, and if you ever have concerns, you're free to bring them to us. But we hope you'll do it through the proper channels. Ms. Yu then gently suggested that Linda consider ways to repair her relationship with the community. Oakwood Village looks out for its own, even when someone makes a mistake, she said. Showing people you're ready to contribute positively could go a long way in mending fences. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. They touched on Linda's future involvement in local committees, how to approach disagreements with civility, and the importance of respecting public resources. While Linda didn't walk away with her pride fully restored, she found an unexpected sense of clarity. For the first time, she recognized that her quest for control had undermined the very sense of unity she claimed to cherish. Before they parted ways, Sheriff Beaumont extended a tentative olive branch. We'll hold more community forums soon, he told Linda. If you'd like to attend or even help us organize them, I believe we can use your attention to detail in a constructive manner. Linda offered a faint smile and a nod. She wasn't quite ready to commit, but the idea of being involved without causing chaos seemed possible. As she left the station, Ms. Yu walked with her, casually suggesting volunteer opportunities in the area where Linda's organizational skills might shine. One of them was a community outreach program at a local pantry, a place that provided meals and essential supplies to residents in need. Ms. Yu said it was a wonderful way to reconnect with neighbors on a more compassionate level. On the drive home, Linda mulled over everything that had been said. For once, she didn't feel a burning urge to place blame on others. Instead, she wondered if her energy could be better spent lifting up Oakwood Village instead of scrutinizing it. Slowly, she began to see that her love for the community might be harnessed for positive change, a path far different from the combative one she had taken before. A week passed before Linda mustered the courage to step inside the community outreach center located at the edge of Oakwood Village. This modest facility, which served as a pantry and dining space, was a hub of activity most mornings. Volunteers bustled about, unloading canned goods, sorting fresh produce, and preparing simple meals for residents facing tough times. Though Linda had driven by the building countless times, she had never truly noticed it. Her focus had always been on what she perceived as the gills of the neighborhood, not the quiet efforts to help those in need. The moment she walked in, a volunteer coordinator named Joy greeted her with a warm smile. Linda introduced herself, feeling the slightest twinge of embarrassment at the recognition that flickered across Joy's face. Clearly, Linda's reputation had preceded her. Nonetheless, Joy gently guided her through the basics of stocking shelves and maintaining inventory lists, explaining how important it was to keep things organized so visitors could easily find what they needed. At first, Linda performed her tasks mechanically, her thoughts drifting to the fiasco with the Wi-Fi and the humiliating neighborhood council meeting. But as the day wore on, she found herself chatting with other volunteers. Some were longtime residents who knew about her missteps but chose not to bring it up, focusing instead on the common goal of service. A few of the people who came to the pantry for assistance recognized Linda. Surprised but grateful for her help, they even thanked her, creating a sense of camaraderie she had not felt in a while. The experience humbled her in unexpected ways. As she handed out boxes of groceries and listened to people's stories, about job losses, medical bills, family struggles, Linda began to see a different side of Oakwood Village, one she had scarcely considered. She realized that her preoccupation with trivial issues had blinded her to the genuine hardships faced by many. Her usual complaints about unswept sidewalks or late garbage pickups paled in comparison to the challenges these neighbors experienced daily. Over the next few days, Linda returned to the pantry, each time feeling more at ease among both volunteers and patrons. She noticed a shift in how people interacted with her. They stopped whispering when she approached and started greeting her openly. Perhaps they saw she was making an effort to change, or maybe they simply recognized sincerity in her willingness to help. In turn, Linda began to feel a gradual release of the anger and resentment she'd been carrying. While she still believed in maintaining a well-run community, Linda now understood that the spirit of Oakwood Village wasn't about strict oversight, it was about compassion, cooperation, and true neighborly support. And in coming to that realization, she took her first real steps toward redemption. Each shift at the pantry served as a quiet reminder that bridging gaps and offering aid could be far more powerful than drawing lines and sending complaints. As word spread of Linda's volunteer work at the outreach center, the chatter around Oakwood Village began to change. Where once her name elicited eye rolls and hushed whispers, it now sparked cautious curiosity. Was this the same woman who had called 911 over a password? It seemed impossible, yet there she was, week after week, restocking shelves and greeting visitors with a patience and warmth few had witnessed before. In time, even members of the neighborhood council took notice. Chairperson Agnes Whitfield dropped by the pantry one morning, ostensibly to donate a few bags of groceries. In truth, she wanted to see Linda in action, unsure whether this new attitude was genuine or just another ploy for attention. But seeing Linda work diligently, Agnes recognized sincerity in her gestures. Linda greeted Agnes, thanked her for the donation, and continued organizing canned goods without any trace of self-importance. A few days later, Sheriff Beaumont made a quiet visit as well. He spoke briefly with Linda in a corner of the pantry, expressing appreciation for her newfound commitment. "I'm glad to see you're channeling your passion into helping others," he said softly, his earlier reservations about Linda tempered by the evidence of real growth. Linda, for her part, thanked him for arranging the meeting with Ms. Yu and admitted that she had learned a valuable lesson. For the first time, she confessed that her desire to keep Oakwood Village safe had overshadowed her empathy for those who actually needed support. As the weeks turned into a month, Linda's involvement at the pantry evolved. She volunteered to handle administrative tasks, leveraging her meticulous nature for inventory tracking and scheduling. Her organizational skills, once poured into critiquing neighbors, now went into optimizing the pantry's supply chain. The staff and volunteers, initially hesitant to embrace her, found her dedication a welcome boost to their operations. In the background, rumors circulated that the neighborhood council might consider reinstating Linda in some capacity, perhaps not on the main board but in a role suited to community outreach. While Linda appreciated the possibility, she wasn't in a hurry to reclaim any official title. After all, she felt more fulfilled meeting people's immediate needs than she ever had leafing through policy documents or monitoring yards for violations. Eventually, a small local paper ran a follow-up story, this time highlighting Linda's transformation. The headline read, "From Tension to Transformation, Oakwood Village Resident Finds Redemption Through Service." The article praised Linda's willingness to learn from her mistakes and spotlighted the positive effects of her volunteer work. Instead of cringing at the media coverage, Linda felt a quiet pride. She understood that change didn't erase the past, but it could pave the way for a better future. Walking home one afternoon, Linda paused to admire the gentle sway of the trees lining her street. She used to see them as markers for property lines and rule enforcement. Now, they simply reminded her that communities flourish when people nurture one another. With a renewed sense of purpose, she carried her volunteer badge in her bag, ready for the next shift at the pantry, grateful, at last, to be part of Oakwood Village in a way that truly mattered.